It's now my very great pleasure to introduce the Minister for Government Services and the NDIS, Bill Shorten. Congratulations again on the announcement of the Robodebt Royal Commission. We've just been discussing automation and Robodebt in great length in the previous session. And thank you too for all of the engagement on debt recovery and improving those practices. We've really appreciated you hitting the ground running and involving us in those conversations really early. Our first question from the audience is actually on this very question of Robodebt. So if you don't mind, we might just jump in there. Obviously, we have this Royal Commission, but what else are you doing to make sure that Robodebt doesn't happen again?
Well, just before we say obviously, the Royal Commission wasn't obvious. It's taken the election of a Labor government to do it. So please don't just sort of bank the outcome of the fact of having the Royal Commission and say, what's your next trick? Because I'm going to pause on that point. The Robodebt Royal Commission is a real commitment by the Albanese government to get to the heart of what went wrong. So I don't just think it's just obvious. The opposition are having a bet each way. They, on one hand, want us to cover the whole history of, I don't know, whenever they think we should cover. On the other hand, they don't think there should be a Royal Commission. They've been accusing us of a witch hunt. So it's $30 million of resource. The Honourable Catherine Holmes is a fiercely independent but very senior and respected jurist. We want to make sure that that we get to the heart of why and how and who and how long, why it could go for so long, and advocates and the Victorian Legal Aid Commission and respected academics and indeed opposition MPs complaining about it for 4.5 years couldn't seem to turn their mind on it. It only took the class action on top of the VLA matter to, I think, force the government. But beyond Robodebt, as you just sort of briefly alluded to, Leanne, I've, at my own initiative since I've become a minister a couple of months ago, started pretty intensive meetings with parts of civil society on how can we be best practice in terms of the way we relate to people where the government thinks that a debt may have been incurred. I'm not satisfied with the status quo. I think we can do it a lot better. At the very outset, I accept that even the language on the letters, you know, accounts payable, we're going to change that back. I want to also make sure that when people receive a note or receive a communication from the government, that they are told that they don't have to agree with it. Also, I want to try, I've told Services Australia that when a debt is alleged or an overpayment's alleged, that the agency has to explain how that number's arrived at. I mean, none of this is rocket science, but none of this has been happening, I think, to a level that we should expect. We need to make clear what the appeals process is. We need to make sure the communication is in plain English. We need to make sure that Service Australia staff are resourced and capable of dealing with people who receive a statement saying they may be, that a citizen may owe the government money. I think we can do it a lot better. And I know Leanne and others have been attending meetings I've been pulling on to just lift the standard of Services Australia communication with its citizens. We're also doing a user experience survey audit of MyGov. We want to really reach out to people and make sure that the way that we communicate with people is much more empowering. It's much more about accompanying individuals on their life journey, and that it's a lot less painful. Also, what we're doing is doing a lot more. I want to do a lot more outreach into communities rather than people coming into Centrelink. I want to use some of our promised extra positions from the election in Services Australia to embed them in community organisations to help pick up people who are essentially social outcasts and not able to access the safety net. So there's a range of things that we're doing. I also want to look at how long back government can allege an overpayment from a citizen. I think the length of time that a government can go back against a citizen is far too long, except in clear criminal cases.
These are all such encouraging initiatives, and we really look forward to working with you on these.
Mhm.
Another question from the audience on this is, can you commit to providing independent access to the key decision-making digital technologies to ensure that the system is working consistent with law and unbiased, and to enhance ability of welfare legal centres like ours and Centrelink customers to understand how the calculations are made?
Yes, that's absolutely on my to-do list. I want to reinvigorate communication between civil society and Services Australia. I want to make sure also that where people go to welfare rights or legal organisations, community legal centres or legal aid, that Services Australia respects the communication once someone's gone there, so that it's easier for advocates to be able to cut through the red tape to be able to take up individuals' matters and be dealt with in a timely and effective manner. In terms of transparency of how we work out matters, I'm completely up for that agenda.
Fantastic. And we have been talking to Services Australia about an advocates line, and we really appreciate your support on that.
Yep.
The next question is, what does the government plan to do to restore integrity to the AAT in the face of recent reports about the high number of political appointments or appointments which are not legally qualified? This is a pressing issue from our point of view, and we've just had a session about that this morning too.
Oh, it's a pressing issue from my viewpoint too. I'm not saying that someone with a political background should never be appointed, but the fact that there's now at least 85 ex-Liberal staffers, coalition staffers, candidates, failed or otherwise, it's ridiculous. It's become a dumping ground for a party, for a coalition of small government. They seem to love a government job for themselves in big numbers. So, and it has an effect on the credibility of the tribunal, of the AAT. So we are pretty seized about that. We want to make sure, and we're carefully considering how the AAT can best serve Australians and live up to its legislative objectives, which I just, with some of the personnel they've got there now, I think is seriously compromised, at least in the perception of credibility and maybe even practically with some of the decisions that are coming out.
Thank you. The next question is about disasters. So with the frequency of disasters increasing in Australia, what work is being done in the space of social security and climate justice disaster preparedness to make social security more efficient and effective in the face of a disaster?
Well, you know some of the headline issues. First of all, Labor has already put legislation through the House of Representatives to set an emissions target of reducing our emissions by 43%. Under the previous coalition prime ministers, we had 22 different energy policies, and it's been a black hole in terms of policy really for a decade. So we've, I think, got things moving again in the right direction. In terms of Services Australia and climate disaster, the reality is that there is no longer just a summer season or a bushfire season. It seems to roll through. I mean, except some of that's pandemic related too. But I want to increase the number of permanent people working in Services Australia and rely less on contractors. Contractors have a role, but I want to see more permanent jobs back in our public service. That builds up a proficiency. I think that's important. As we increase our digital capacity, in the recent floods, 90% of claims were processed online, so that's pleasing. We have to make sure, though, that we have services in disaster-struck communities straight away. I think, though, MyGov is probably doing better than I hoped, and its capacity to take on board more of the issues and more people frees up the ability for human assistance where people are not able to avail themselves of the digital option.
This isn't a question, but I want to read it out. It says, I'm not sure if you're able to make this just a comment, but I'd like to say, if you could please, if you could see us, you would see us all applauding. Thank you, Minister.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to see that, but anyway. This is a bit like talking in space anyway, but I get to hear you, Leanne, so thank you.
So the next question is from Len Jaffet about debts and reviews and appeals. Will you consider pausing recovery of debts when they're contested or at least a discretion to do this?
I haven't got a firm or fixed view, but I guess it all just depends on amount and circumstance. But I don't start from the position of no. I just need to take that on board. I guess it varies, but the concept of discretion, sure, I understand that argument. So there's not deciphering what I just said. I'm open to it, as some of the advocates and people here will attest to others when I'm not in earshot. I'm sure you're finding me quite accessible. So I don't know is the short answer, but I'm open to it. My response is more why not than why, if that makes sense.
Which has really been our experience in our first few meetings with you on the debt recovery issues. So we really appreciate that.
I mean, for the people who aren't in those meetings, I start off with, I get the community advocates to make their points, and then I really ask Services Australia, what's wrong with these ideas? And I don't regard myself there as a departmental spokesperson. I regard myself as just trying to make sure that we're fair to people who utilise the system. And my rhetoric isn't about punishing people. It's that's just not how I'm built.
The next question is actually from someone with lived experience. Thank you, Minister Shorten, for your focus on these important issues. Will you be open to expert lived experience advisory councils for those with who are long-term participants in the system? I believe many of your answers lie within rich lived experience experts. Thank you. And some of us have navigated this alone and not even with the help of the legal system.
Yeah, it's not a bad idea. Well, it seems a pretty fair idea. So I want to revitalise the civil society dialogue with Services Australia. I'll have a take on board that question about discretion, about insisting on payments while there's appeal process is underfoot. I do get some benefit by talking to the people who do, the tribunal work about the flaws in the system. But I also think the people with lived experience are the best. There'd be no other walk of life where you wouldn't have the users of the system being treated as very important in their voices. So I think the suggestion makes sense. I'm interested in maybe through this forum, you can work out how that sort of structure might work periodically where we talk to people.
Well, that leads very nicely into the next question from Aidan McCarthy, who was previously at Social Security Rights Victoria. He says the Child Abuse Royal Commission had funding for legal services for those accessing it. Will the government commit to funding legal services for the Robodebt Royal Commission? And I guess from Economic Justice Australia's perspective, we want to be able to support those voices of lived experience to be able to contribute their stories to the Royal Commission.
I think that's a legitimate purpose of part of the $30 million that we've allocated. I want to be really clear. This isn't going to be like the Child Abuse Royal Commission where we get thousands of voices saying how terrible Robodebt was. There's got to be case studies. So we've got to get some of those lived experience stories up. But we want to get this Robodebt Royal Commission done by April of next year. There has been a class action. There has been telling of stories. So yes, it'll still be possible, but I don't want to, thousands of people get annoyed. They haven't each had a phone call and they've been able to talk it through. That isn't the purpose that Labor announced with this Royal Commission, although we have to get some of those stories up as case studies to unpick all the horrible treatment that occurred. So we will also, we want to get to the heart of, this is not about us chasing junior public servants. Senior public servants and responsible ministers should have thought about these issues before they commenced on this journey, and they certainly should have thought about the problems as they were being raised. Instead, they doubled down pretty arrogantly and did several iterations of the same scheme. So we want to get to that matter. And then within that, of course, there has to be a discussion about the use of artificial intelligence. This isn't just a story of steeple-fingered, cruel coalition ministers, although in my opinion, that is a bit of the story. It's also, why didn't the system respond when people were complaining in vast numbers? And also, why did we assume that the machine was right and the humans were wrong? But there is money for services and research and submissions. That's certainly my very clear understanding.
That's really fantastic for all of our services to hear. Thank you. We're right on lunch now, so I'm just going to ask the last question, which I'm sure you'd have to anticipate in any interview. When will the rate be raised?
Well, I think it's a fair question. There's indexation in September. We don't have a plan to raise the rate in the immediate future. I can't promise that. I do think, though, it is low, and I do think that it's hard for people to live on it. If not impossible, I couldn't. So I think that's just going to be an ongoing dialogue between the government and a whole lot of people who've got a legitimate aspiration to see it go up.
Thank you, Minister, both for joining us today and for all the work that you've done since coming to office, which we really appreciate and look forward to seeing you at the Jobs Summit and working with you on an ongoing basis.
I meaningfully say to you, I mean it when I say I appreciate the work all of you do. It's been a very difficult 9 years. I don't expect that in my areas everything I do will immediately, everyone will agree with everything, but I start from the viewpoint that a lot of what you're saying is right, not wrong. I also start from the viewpoint that you have a legitimate right to keep the system honest. So I regard you as an opportunity for me to get better performance and better actions out of government.
Thank you so much.
See you. Bye.